Hello everyone, welcome back to RM History. In this video, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different to what I usually do. I'm going to be going over the future of the Royal Navy. This video will basically just go over the Royal Navy in like the past few decades, and then the Royal Navy in the next few decades, from what we know at least. So, of course, to understand the future of the Royal Navy, we've got to understand the Royal Navy in the past few decades, like I just said. So the last 60 years have been a period of decline for the entire UK military. The percentage of GDP that was spent on the defence has fallen by about 5% since 1960, which isn't too much. I mean, it don't seem like too much, but it actually is quite a lot. And so, obviously, with this, the amount of money spent on the Royal Navy has also decreased a lot. These expenditure cuts have become very apparent. In 1977, many ships of the Royal Navy gathered at Spithead for a review from the Queen, and this review included 2 aircraft carriers, 2 cruisers, 17 destroyers, 18 frigates, 14 submarines, and many more assault ships, minesweepers, and minor vessels. Nowadays, we have way less ships. As of 2026, in Royal Navy service, we have 10 submarines, 2 aircraft carriers, 6 destroyers, 6 frigates, 8 offshore patrol vessels, 18 inshore patrol vessels, 8 minesweepers, and a few other ships that are either auxiliary or not commissioned. If we narrow this down to just warships and submarines, we only have 24 ships. 100 years ago, the Royal Navy had around 450 to 470 ships. Around 100 of those were warships. And in 1946, the Royal Navy had about 800 ships, about 120 of which were warships. We have to understand that the reason the Navy was so big back then was because of the empire we had. The empire was the biggest history has ever seen, and thus has to be protected by a massive navy. Personally, I don't believe we need that big of a navy anymore. It probably would just be useless and many other ships just sitting in port all the time. I do believe, however, that we need a navy that is big enough to protect all the territories we currently hold, and is also capable of securing our interests abroad and helping our allies across NATO. Our territories spread across the entire world, and if some madman, like dictator person, decided to invade and seize one of them, only 6 of the 14 territories currently have protection from the UK Armed Forces, and so they would that territory, if it wasn't one of those 6 territories that were protected, just be taken easily, and a bit like what happens in the Falklands. These protected territories include Cyprus, or the military base we have in Cyprus, the Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, the British Indian Ocean Territory, and the Ascension Islands, and Bermuda, sorry. Prior to 1982, the Falkland Islands had very few military personnel on them, and they were invaded by Argentina, and so we had to send a task force across the Atlantic to take them back. This already showed a lack of protection for our territories, and now that we have even more cuts than then, it's going to be even harder to protect them. If the Falklands War was to happen today, which, while it's probably unlikely, it doesn't seem impossible, we would have no chances of winning. The Navy is just not big enough to be sent across the Atlantic and then fight in a war. We would have to use pretty much every ship in the Royal Navy if we wanted to match the task force sent in 1982. This would also mean that any losses would be way more devastating than losses in 1982. Another reason for having a decently sized navy is our contribution to NATO. So the UK has the third biggest GDP in NATO, and yet it is the 14th largest defense spending in NATO. And personally, that just doesn't really seem very fair to me. Like, surely if we have such big GDP, and we've agreed to protect nations in NATO, we should be putting a good amount of our GDP into NATO. I mean, that is just my opinion, but I think that's fair. In more recent years, the UK government has decided to increase the defence budget and spend more money on the military and navy, but these plans seem to have fallen through. And considering Starmer's time in office seems to be coming to an end, he probably is not focusing on increasing the defence budget at the moment. There are even reports of the current destroyers in construction possibly being scrapped, which would not be good considering the Type 45 destroyers we currently have are starting to reach the midpoint of their life, and it's about time that we should be building new destroyers to replace them. Now, everything I've covered so far is about the Royal Navy in the past, but what does this all mean for the future? This probably all depends on our next government. The next few slides will go over what will happen to our military if a certain party gets into power. So if Reform UK gets into power, they plan to increase the defence budget and become one of the leading, and make the UK one of the leading countries in NATO. This would obviously be good for the Navy, and we would probably see more advanced ships being planned and commissioned. The Conservatives also want to see an increase in the defence budget. They get into power, they want to raise the defence spending by about £50 billion. This increase would raise our defence spending to around 4% of the GDP. This would rise us to be in the top 3 of NATO members. Again, this would be good for the Navy, but it depends on how much of that 50 billion is going to be spent on the Army and Air Force as well. One of Labour's policies is to also become a leading member in NATO, but it's clear from the current government that they're not really able to do that. So it's unclear if any future governments would also be able to do that. If the Green Party got into office, they would try to divert most of the defence funds towards the defence of the country rather than towards more offensive measures. For the Navy, this is not very good. They would scrap all nuclear submarines, nuclear armed submarines that is, and try to make the UK nuclear weapons free. And they would make most ships more defensive than offensive. This means seeing more patrol vessels and less destroyers. Overall, the Conservative policies are probably the best, mainly because they have more of an idea of what they would do and how they would do it. Reformed policies do seem good, but they don't have any proper plans on how to do what they want to do. This is probably because they are focusing more on other things like immigration. The Green Party is by far the worst of the Royal Navy, for the Royal Navy. Scrapping 4 of our 9 submarines and diverting those funds towards things like the NHS and benefits is not going to be good for the Navy. Let's say a party which will fund the military but not overfund it gets into power. What will happen then? If we use the Conservatives as an example, they will attempt to put an extra 50 billion into the defence budget, as said previously. Around 25 to 30% of the current budget goes to the Navy. So with an extra 50 billion, the Navy's budget would be about 30 billion. Around 43% of the Navy's money goes towards new equipment and ships, so we would be able to replace ships quite easily, as that 43% would be around 12.9 billion. Considering the HMS Queen Elizabeth cost around £3.5 billion to build, we would be quite comfortable. The Type 26 frigate programme is expected to be somewhere around 10 billion, and that is over many years. So it is safe to say, with the Conservative defence budget, this programme would be complete as long as everything goes to plan. The Type 32 frigate and Type 83 destroyer are all being planned and developed at the moment. They are planned to be entering service in the mid-2030s, but are currently not in construction. The Type 31 frigate is under construction at the moment, and 2 of the 5 ships have been launched. They are planned to enter service in the 2020s, so probably more towards the 2030s now, considering we're getting to the end of the 2020s, but you might see some entering service in like 2029, 2028. All of these mentioned programs would be able to be completed with the Conservatives coming into power. This is probably the same with Reform UK, but their defence budget has not been publicly planned, and so we cannot confirm anything. The Dreadnought class submarines are also in construction and planned to be in service by the mid-2030s. They will also be funded well and be able to be completed. The Aucus class submarine, I think it's pronounced, is planned to replace the Astute class in the 2030s. They are not in construction and are currently being planned and developed. The Royal Navy has also been experimenting with new types of ships, unmanned vessels. They have launched a few different ships which are purely experimental and not ready for proper service. In the future though, we could see a new form of naval combat similar to drone combat in land warfare. While it may seem like there are loads of ships in construction currently, and the Royal Navy is finally expanding again, this assumption is wrong. All of these ships in construction are being built to replace a class that is currently being used. These ships will be put into service as soon as the ships are decommissioned. That is it for this video. If you have any questions or you think anything is wrong, please do tell me. All of this is done purely by my own research, and so I don't doubt that some of it might be wrong. From as far as I know, a lot of it is probably correct, but if I've misread anything from a news article or anything like that, there might be some stuff that is like slightly wrong. So if you know something's wrong, please do correct me, and thanks for watching.